Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. This is Amna Girl from the Department of Journalism and Mass Communication. We're back with the course Communication Skills for Media, bearing the code GMC 232. It's our sixth lecture today, and the topic is Understanding Communication Basics. Actually, it is a continuation of the last lecture. In the last lecture, we discussed some of the things, but we were still discussing elements of the communication process, and we'll continue with those. Amongst the elements, we discussed first encoding and decoding. Encoding, we discussed or referred to the process of taking an idea or a mental image, associating that with certain words, and then speaking those out to convey a message. Decoding was the opposite process. It was actually the process of listening to words, thinking about them, and then turning those words into mental images. Communicator, we discussed, was a more encompassing term than sender and receiver, because communication is always a transactional process, a give and take of messages. Then we discussed message. That message actually involves both verbal and non-verbal elements, and if ever there is a conflict between the verbal and non-verbal aspects of a message, people usually believe the non-verbal portion of the message. So we have seen it in many examples. And then we also discussed that messages can be intentional and unintentional depending on that the kind of image that they form on the mind of the receiver. So thus we actually finished off saying that as communicators, we cannot always be sure that whichever message we intended to communicate, it is interpreted the way we wanted it to be interpreted. Having said that, now we'll move towards the fourth element of the communication process, which is channel. The channel is very simply the means through which the message travels. In face-to-face communication, the channel involves all of our senses. So the channel is what we see, what we hear, we touch, smell, and perhaps what we taste, dependent on the kind of communication that is happening. When we are communicating with someone online, the channel is the computer. When texting, the channel is the cell phone, and when watching a movie on cable, the channel is the TV. So the channel can have a profound impact on the way a message is interpreted. Listening to a recording of a speaker does not have the same psychological impact as listening to the same speech in person or watching that person on television. So what I compared was, if you are only listening to a recording, listening, not watching, it doesn't affect you the same way, it doesn't have the same impact when you are listening to the same speech by the same person live, when you are listening to it in person. Same is the case if you are listening or watching the same speech by that same person on television. So these are three different scenarios. Okay. Now, having said that, let's move towards a very important element, that is noise, which is the next aspect of the model of communication. Noise refers to anything that interferes with message transmission or reception, which is like getting the image from your head into others' heads. There are several different types of noise. I'll just discuss a few. The most important ones, and I'll not go into a lot of details. So the first type of noise is physiological noise, and this refers to bodily processes and states that interfere with a message. For example, if the speaker is having a headache or a flu, or if audience members are feeling hot or they're hungry. So these conditions may interfere with message accuracy. You remember for your own selves, for example, we have a class and you're hungry, you want to have some food. So you're least interested, like you're more interested in having a break and going out to have some refreshments. The second type of noise is psychological noise. Psychological noise refers to mental states or emotional states that impede message transmission or reception. For example, if someone is worried about their grandmother who's in the hospital, or if they are thinking about their shopping list or their assignments, this may interfere with the communication processes as well. The third type of noise is actual physical noise, and this would be simply the actual sound level in a room. Loud music playing at a wedding, a number of voices of people talking excitedly, or a lawnmower right outside your window, or a tractor passing by. Anything that is overly loud will interfere with communication. The last type of noise is cultural noise. Yes, there is a cultural noise as well. Cultural noise refers to message interference that results from differences in people's worldviews. I'll be discussing worldviews separately, but for example, a journal explanation is the greater the difference in worldview, the more difficult it is to understand one another and communicate effectively. So this, I think I should go more into detail. Most people don't give a lot of thought to the communication process. In majority of our interactions with others, in majority of our interactions with anybody, we are operating on automatic pilot. Like we don't actually plan and think about how communication is occurring. Although the encoding and decoding process may appear to be fairly straightforward, it is actually much more complicated than it seems. The reason for this is because we all have different worldviews. Worldview is the overall framework through which we as an individual see, think about, and interpret the world and interact with it. So there are 5 core components of our worldview, and I'll be discussing each one in detail now. Starting off with epistemology. Epistemology is the way that we acquire knowledge, or what counts as knowledge, our understanding of what is knowledge. Think about the process of conducting research. 30 years ago, to find a series of facts, one had to use a card catalog and score the library's tax for books. Now researchers can access thousands of pages of information via their computer from the comfort of their home. Same is the case with your assignments. There are very few amongst you who actually go visit the library and search something in the books. Most of you go on Google and you start off your search. So epistemology is linked to public speaking because it governs audience members' preferred learning styles and who or what they consider to be credible sources. There was a time, for example, there was no concept of internet. So epistemology is that how we as audience members or anybody, how we acquire knowledge and what do we count as knowledge. Now moving on to ontology. Ontology refers to our belief system, how we see the nature of reality or what we see as true or false. We may or may not believe in aliens from outer space, or that humans will be extinct in 200 years. So speech writers should be careful not to presume that audience members share the same beliefs. If a speaker claims that illness can be aided with prayer only, but several members in the audience are, for example, God forbid, they are atheists, at best the speaker has lost his credibility, and at worst these audience members could be offended. So you have to be very careful what are the belief systems of your audience, or how do they see the nature of reality, or something like what they feel as true or false. Then third is Xology. Xology represents our value system, or what we see as right or wrong, good or bad, and fair or unfair. One of the ways that you can tell what people value is to ask them what their goals are, or to ask them what qualities they look for in a friend, for example. Our values represent the things that we hope for. They do not represent reality. Values can have an impact on multiple levels of the public speaking process, but in particular, values impact speaker credibility and effectiveness in persuasion. For instance, some cultures value modest dress for women. So a female speaker who is wearing a dress that is culturally inappropriate, so while speaking, such a female speaker could cause, such a dress could cause her to lose her credibility with some audience members. Or if audience members value the freedom to bear arms, like guns and stuff, over the benefits of government regulation, which is very common in these parts of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, a speaker will have a difficult time convincing these audience members to vote for a stricter gun control legislation. Then the next is cosmology. Cosmology signifies the way that we see our relationship to the universe and to other people. Cosmology dictates our view of power relationships and may involve our religious or spiritual beliefs. Controversial speech topics like death penalty are often related to this aspect of worldview, as we must consider our responsibilities to other human beings and our power to influence them. Interestingly, cosmology would also play a role in such logistical points as to who is allowed to speak, the order of the speakers on a schedule, for example, the most to least important, the amount of time a speaker has to speak, the seating arrangements on the dais or on stage, and who gets the front seats in the audience. That is also related to cosmology. Last but not the least, Praxology. Praxology denotes our preferred method of completing everyday tasks or approach to solving problems. Some speechwriters may begin working on their outlines as soon as they know they will need to give a speech, while others may wait until a few days before their speech to begin preparing. I would never recommend this approach for you people. We have already seen this in our last presentations, that those who tried to do it at the 11th hour, they were in trouble. So praxology may also have an impact on a speaker's preference of delivery style, methods of arranging main points, and choice of slideware, for example, using PowerPoint or comparing that with Prezi. I hope you might not be able to recognize Prezi, but PowerPoint we have already done. So it is important to understand worldview because it has a profound impact on the encoding and decoding process, and consequently on our ability to be understood by others. Let's try this simple experiment. Ask any 2 or 3 people to silently imagine a dog while you imagine a dog at the same time. Now, dog is a very concrete word, a word that describes a tangible object that can be perceived through the senses. You can see a dog, you can touch a dog, you can hear a dog, you can smell a dog. So then wait a few seconds and then ask each person what type of dog they were thinking of. Was it a greyhound, a golden retriever, or some other kind of dog? You might be knowing the types. I'm not very good at it. So most likely each person you asked had a different image in his or her mind than you had in yours. This is our worldview at work. So like we all imagine dog, we all know what a dog is, but when we all imagine, our imaginations are different, dependent on our worldviews. And that shows that we have different worldviews at work. So this is different. Or let's try another example. You can tell a friend that for example, you're hostelite and you tell a hostel mate, I can't wait to go home this weekend. We are having lasagna. Seems like a fairly clear-cut statement, doesn't it? Unfortunately, it's not. Even though lasagna is a concrete word, our worldviews cause us to interpret each word in the statement differently. Where is whom? The questions. Who is making that meal, that lasagna? What ingredients will be used in that lasagna? Is this dish eaten as a regular meal or for a special occasion? Will there be leftovers? Is anybody invited for the meal? Since everyone who has eaten lasagna has had a different experience of the cuisine, we all acquire a different image in our mind when we hear the statement, we are having lasagna. Complicating matters is the fact that the more abstract a word becomes, the more room there is for interpretation. Abstract words that refer to ideas or concepts that are removed from material reality, like peace, love, immoral, justice, freedom, success, and honor. All these words can have a number of different meanings, each of which is predicted on one's worldview. Communicators have their own unique worldviews that shape both the encoding and decoding processes, which means that we can never be completely understood by another person. Thus, you don't ever have to take communication for granted and never assume your listener will understand you. It takes hard work to make yourself understood by an audience. It is hard work, and we need to learn that. Then, context. The last element of the communication process is the context in which the speech or interaction takes place. In 1980s, context was taught as the actual physical setting where communication occurred, such as in a place of worship, a hostel, a workplace, a noisy restaurant, or a grocery store, whatever. And I've just let you imagine certain different physical settings. People communicate differently in each one of these places, as there are unwritten rules of communication, which we can call norms, that govern these settings. More recently, the concept of context has evolved and expanded to include the type of relationships we have with others and the communicative rules that govern those relationships. Coming back, now currently the concept of context has evolved and expanded. It not only includes the physical space where that communication occurs, but also the type of relationship you have with others and the communicative rules that govern those relationships. So, for example, you do not speak the same way to your best friend as you speak to a child, do you? Or when you speak to your parent, or when you speak to your chairman, or a doctor, or when you speak to a police officer. So, if the relationship changes, so the way you speak, it also changes. You have a formal relationship, for example, with the doctor or with a police officer, while with your friend, it's very casual. Or with a child, you might be very kind. With your head of the department, you might be very submissive. So, things change. And you may speak to for example, let's consider now your best friend in different physical settings. You may speak to your best friend differently, for example, in your hostel than you do in your house in the presence of your parents. And your communication may also change when you're both out with friends on the weekend. So, for example, when you are with your friend in hostel, it's like very relaxed, comfortable environment. When you're with your friend in your parents' house, in their presence, it's like more, it's not that relaxed communication. And when it's your same friend and you are out with other friends, it's a group of friends outing on a weekend, so it's another kind of communications. Your communication differs. So in sum, the context refers to the norms that govern communication in different situations and relationships. So it's not just situations, it's both situations and relationships. Having said that, I'll sign off. Thank you.